So the final alternative for dealing with our low fertility rate is to do nothing at all. That's the no action alternative. And I actually think that's the most likely thing that will happen. Since there's no real political will to address low fertility, governments will keep doing what they're doing. Our fertility will continue on the same trajectory it is now. And we're on the roller coaster and we just have to ride it out. Unfortunately, it's going to be a very rough ride. I can envision the Nordic countries like Sweden and Norway tweaking their social services system and bringing up their fertility so that their societies are sustainable. But I don't see that happening in the United States or in the more struggling countries of Europe, where we just don't have the resources to build a social system. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of denial where people just deny that there's any problem at all. Actually, I think the governments in the United States and elsewhere are going to do damaging things to make the problem even worse. Because the problem is invisible to the electorate. It is invisible to voters. If there are more old people on the street and fewer baby carriages, it really isn't noticeable. That problem doesn't really register on the mind of voters. What registers in the minds of voters is our economy is bad, and there are too many immigrants on the street. There are immigrants stealing our jobs. So the people they elect to power are going to address those concerns. They're going to offer magical solutions to make the economy work. And they're going to shut down the immigrant stream so there aren't immigrants stealing our jobs. And in doing so, they're going to make matters worse, because the real underlying problem is our shrinking workforce. The fact that there are too many old people and not enough younger working people to support them. So ultimately, the economy has to fail. It has to contract. It means inevitably that children can't do as well as their parents did when they get to working age, because there's just less economy there. There's less people working. Even if the population itself hasn't actually dropped, there's a smaller proportion of working people. And that's the real problem that's been building up for decades. And a moderate government is going to come in and say, we've got a problem. We have this huge problem that's been building for decades, and there's no easy solutions. We've got to cut Social Security. We've got to cut benefits to old people. And that's not going to be liked by the old people, who are going to vote out this moderate government and vote in some radical government that promises to fix everything in one stroke. The radical government tries its one-stroke fixing. That makes things much worse, and then we have a real collapse on our hands. And if you have that happening all over the world, if all the countries of the world are weak, then the collapse of one country's banking system, say, is going to lead to a ripple effects on all the other countries' banking systems. And I can imagine, you remember the global financial crisis of 2008, where we just survived by a whisker? Maybe that's going to happen again, and we won't have that extra whisker anymore to save us. Maybe we're looking at some big calamity. I can't tell you what the calamity is. I can't tell you when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen. All I can tell you is that there's a huge disequilibrium in most of the countries of the world, where they're not producing enough babies, or they're producing too many babies. And all of this has to come to a head at some point in the near term. But any way you address it, even if you are capable of addressing it, even if all the countries of the world were to manage to bring their fertility rate up to the magic 2.1, well, we still have a problem, because we still have the momentum of all those lost babies, all those births that didn't happen for the last 4 or 5 decades are still there, are still not happening. Imagine, for example, if Japan, with a fertility rate of 1.4, suddenly brought its fertility rate up to 2.1. You would think all its problems are solved. Japan, in the long run, is going to survive. It's going to eventually reach a steady state. But you still have all that pain. You still have decades of pain before you get to that steady state, because with a birth rate of 1.4 that has been happening for decades, there just aren't that many childbirth era women. There aren't that many women of the right age to bear children. So even with a perfect fertility rate, your population in Japan is still going to drop for decades. And you still have all of these problems of a dropping population and a huge proportion of old people. So Japan is not going to be saved by bringing the fertility rate up. And none of the other countries are going to be saved either. In the long run, what we want is a fertility rate of 2.1. But even if we achieve that, we still have to deal with the time bomb that was set up for us by the low fertility rate of all those previous years. I talked about demographic momentum, how the birth rate can drop without the population dropping because you have all the people from previous generations who haven't died yet. The same works in the other direction. Once your population starts to fall, no matter what you do, it's going to continue falling for decades before your fertility rate can have any effect. So I'm not optimistic. I'm not saying that governments shouldn't try to bring up their fertility rate. They should. But even if they do, we still have this catastrophe. We still have this train wreck that's coming down the pike, and we can't do anything about it. We can only try not to do something that makes things worse.